Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Right, well, it's a great pleasure now to introduce Dr. Pete Moore, who is a tutor for the MSc Science Communication course at the University of Western England in Bristol. He's also an honorary fellow in ethics at Trinity College, Bristol. He's a member of the National Health Service Health Technology Assessment Programme's Diagnosis and Imaging Panel. That's a mouthful. He leads training courses on different aspects of writing and editing, both in the UK and Europe, and has won national awards for his writing. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, was chairman of the Medical Journalists Association, and is a member of the Physiological Society, the Association of British Science Writers, and the Society of Authors. He's also acted as rapporteur at consultations held at St George's House, Windsor Castle. This was the John Ray Initiative, environmental organisation, and at private consultations organised by the Christian Medical Fellowship within the House of Lords. So a man of wide experience, and we're looking forward to what you have to say. And indeed, he's written a book about this, which is on our shelves, Enhancing Me, is it called, the book?
Quick camera shot.
Yeah, okay, that's it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm deeply honoured. It's sunny, it's Friday, it's 2 o'clock and you've come in. I'll try to make the experience worthwhile, but we'll see where we go. My history of involvement in this, I refer to myself sometimes as a puddle jumper. 15, 16 years ago I was a bench academic, and then I stepped out. And now I just go and have a splash in a puddle for a bit and move on. And the last puddle I splashed in was on human enhancement, when I was asked to write a book about where human enhancement was going. And so I went on a journey to meet the enthusiasts about it, the people who've said it's been done to them, and the people who are just talking about it in general. Really, with giving them the opportunity to convince me that human enhancement was just around the corner. At the end of it, I wasn't quite so convinced, and we'll see some of that journey as it goes through. I'm quite keen, though, before starting any adventure, to define terms. Now, if you go for human enhancement, a previous book I wrote was called Being Me, What It Means to Be Human. And so I'd already discovered that it's very, very difficult to define human. The other part then was enhancement. So I tried to define enhancement. And as you ask the people who are involved in this area, quite a slippery game started going on, in that no one would actually define enhancement, but wobbled between 3 different ones whenever it was convenient to use that form of the description for their current point of argument. And I'll just introduce them to you. So in the definitions, one of them fits into a zone of societal definitions. And the argument there is that human beings are enhanced. As soon as we learned to light a fire, we started to do things that your average animal running around the place can't do. The ability to build shelters, light fires, make clothes, actually enables us to live in parts of the world that, as a raw animal, would be distinctly inhospitable to us. Bring in a bit of agriculture, move on to a bit of industry, and as a species, we're enhanced way beyond, as a society rather, we're enhanced way beyond what just an animal would be capable of. We could then go for an intellectual enhancement as well, which probably shouldn't be forgotten given where we are at the moment. And that happens at a societal level. Just the individual person working on their own wouldn't achieve what a mass together can. So at that level, we can talk about enhancement. And when you're talking with a number of the enthusiasts and they're saying it's already happened, most of them refer back to this sort of territory. Then I think we can move on to personal enhancement. And another term for this often could be therapy. If you find it difficult walking, a walking stick is a personal enhancing tool. My glasses have been quite useful for me in my life. It was transformative when I was 5, because up until then no one had noticed that I couldn't see with one. And put them on, it changed my scope and what I could achieve. Good old Oscar, with his Mr. Blade Runner, And there's been a real fight as to whether that has enhanced his capability as an athlete. In the end, intriguingly, he won the ability to try to appear at the Olympics. He didn't get there because he wasn't fast enough. But he won the ability to try on the basis that his springy legs weren't very good. Well, that meant I go back to the engineer and say, excuse me, these aren't very good. It seems to be a rather poor defence. But the other thing about personal enhancement is that I don't think, and I think I'll show you at times, that very many of these enhancements are particularly good. Here is a chappie winning an important race. Turns out he was drug enhanced. Here's the chappie who wasn't drug enhanced. Now, if you're going to be enhanced, I would like to do 100 metres in 5 seconds. Not 0.0 seconds faster. That's, I think, stretching the term enhanced, certainly in the popular level of it. I think one of the things which potentially is an enhancement is vaccination. It's a very intriguing one. I'm never sure when I run this one round and round whether this is a personal or a societal enhancement. If you have a vaccination as an individual, it's not particularly useful. It reduces your chance of picking up an infection, it doesn't stop it. You need a herd immunity. You need to get up into the 90% of take-up before it becomes a really useful tool. And then it's enhancing. And I'm very grateful for being used as a pincushion on occasions. And we're wandering into other areas of, so we've got our Ritalin-O's to have for breakfast. And we'll have a look at the effects of taking a few of these drugs later on. So, what I think happens in the popular consciousness then is people think we're talking about species enhancement when people talk about human enhancement. And then these become harder to locate as real concrete examples of what's going on. This is a finger possessed by a chap called Todd, and it's a different finger to most of ours in that if you put it over a ferrous object, it will stick to his finger, because buried in his finger is now a magnet. So he can do interesting things like he can pick up ball bearings. More interesting than that though, he can actually detect magnetic fields, and we'll come back to Todd later on. Kevin Warwick makes a habit of claiming media space, and does it by sticking things, well, he's only done it twice actually, but he's done rather well out of those 2 occasions. On this occasion he's put a little cuff with spikes into the nerve running in his arm and just connected it to a simple transformer so that he can get, well, there are 128 spikes, he got 38 of them working, and initially it dropped down to about 16 later on. But it did mean that he could feed that information out and drive a robotic arm at a distance. He could, and that distance at one point was he flew to America and got his arm to move in Reading by connecting it up to the internet. And on this occasion, his wife has also got a simpler implant, so that if he thinks, I want to say hello, he can move his wrist a bit and it buzzes in his wife's arm. So they have a sort of electronic form of communication, which again they could be as far away as you want to be, so long as you've got some form of mobile attachment. And he's absolutely convinced that that's a species enhancement. This is a little spiky chip that's designed to sit in the surface of your brain. And the people who are doing it are hoping that it's going to become the new form of external memory, sort of a plug-in extra memory bank. I'm not buying shares at the moment, and we'll come back to that one later. we bumped into deep brain stimulation, and again we'll have a look at that. These are things which I think take us into slightly new territories, and all of these potentially nudge on the corner of species enhancement. Why is the brain, though, so important? And I'm enormously grateful for my ability to keep time to people who've gone before, like Peter, because I was sat there this morning hacking out slides that I now didn't have to do. But he'd done so much better. But in summary, there's another book I wrote. This was the one trying to work out what it is to be human. And each chapter looks at different facets of what it is to be a human being. And one of them then is to say that I'm a conscious being is rather important. And actually I would argue it's the one that, as a sort of society, we've taken on almost to the exclusion of anything else. And if we have a look at consciousness, and can see how it sort of slipped into some, certainly in the UK, via sort of a legislative route. How do we measure it? Well, clinically, it's done by sticking electrodes on, or asking people to do things, or squirting very cold water into their ear, and see if you elicit a response. As was alluded to earlier, there are some fascinating occasions of people who elicit no response at that level, but if you put their head in a scanner and show them a picture of their family members, then areas of face recognition light up. And if you show them pictures of people they've never met before, you get no response. So it's quite difficult to put these people into scanners because they have to be still, and most people who are in these sorts of states are not still, but are distinctly jerky, and if you anaesthetise them to make them still, then they don't respond. So it's a very difficult one to work with. Intriguing, when I wrote Being Me, one of the people I interviewed was in a locked-in syndrome, and my mode of communicating with her was to send emails which she could read, and then slowly she blinked her response to each question. And so I had a delayed dialogue with her over a number of weeks and months as we built her story up. But then this has become intriguingly built into our legislative framework, because brain death is now associated with the point that you can take an organ out. And we were getting into this territory when we started talking about anencephalic kids, because that's no brain, so it's a no-brainer. So you then get into the thing, well, can you do an experiment on them? I mean, if you can remove the organs and use them, I mean, you disseminate it into 500-700 different products. If you give your body for donation, so we're quite happy about splitting ourselves up into lots of bits. At the point of which we say that the electronic capability of the brain has stopped. That's not to say the cells in there are dead, but they're no longer talking to each other in the way that they once did. So, if you've got brain death, you've got no consciousness, you're dead. At the other end of life, if there's no neurons, there's no consciousness, you're not yet alive. And that's buried inside the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority's key rationale for saying that up to 14 days, a point at which there is no neuron around, you cannot yet be alive. After there, you had the first sort of prototype neurons coming in. Well, it could be debatable from then on. But up until then, no neuron, no possibility of life. So what are we worried about? So consciousness and its material that helped that to occur, whatever consciousness is, has become a key defining point as to who we are. And I'm interested, again, we had a more extended historical view. My sort of quick puddle jump is that there was the point when blood was really important. It was about the most technical part of the body that we were capable of dealing with. And it was very, very obvious that your life was in blood. I mean, try letting it all out and see what happens. And then we moved up. Galen was central to it. You know, if you're looking for the bit that's leaping around, that responds if you're in a panic, that calms down when you're not in a panic, well, it's blindingly obvious. It's your heart, isn't it? And again, take it out, and everything ceases to occur. So your heart becomes a central part to who you are. And that extends right the way through. If you read the press cuttings when Bernard started doing the first heart transplants, and the fear, then the questions around, certainly at a popular level, but going further was, is this taking something that's key to the person out of it? And most of us would now be quite happy with the notion of a heart transplant. A brain transplant? Would we be happy with a brain transplant? Well, my hunch is that actually our nervousness of a brain transplant rests on the fact that this is now the most technical thing that we're dealing with in the body. The fact that we've moved on each time through history, I can't imagine history's stopped. Why has history stopped? So I've got no idea in 200 years' time what they're going to be worried about. But I'm not entirely sure they're going to be worried about the brain. In the same way that we're not worried about a heart or a blood transfusion. I might be wrong. History might have stopped. We might have come to the limit of our learning. But that would be surprising. So, that's a bit of the background. Let's have a look at some of the things which have been proposed as ways of enhancing a brain. And I've limited myself to just brain as much as possible today. And in discussions we can maybe talk about other factors of enhancement. But you've got the opportunity of plugging things in. And some of them are out there. And I know they're out there because I've met people. And your cochlear implant is quite a useful device. I've put it probably down at the level at the moment of a personal enhancement. It's a therapy. It's a therapeutic tool. And it's a really useful therapeutic tool. The question then becomes, what can you hide in this little box tucked behind your ear? How about building a mobile phone in? You might want to protect it against the radiation and put the antenna somewhere else. But then you could be permanently linked up to voice communications. You could link it up to a GPS system, so it could constantly tell you where you are. You could have all sorts of communication tools built into that. So that then becomes a hardwired part of your existence. That is distinctly built into you. You couldn't decide one morning just to walk away from it. So I think there's some interesting territory down there. It's technically fairly simple to do, down the fairly simple route, in that you're taking a little cloth and just plugging it onto the nerve, and you're feeding stuff in. It's always harder to get stuff out than to feed it in. So you're feeding the signals from the little box here down into the brain. It's nice in that there's very little that once you put it in, you don't have to have anything bridging the skull. And a lot of surgical problems occur once you breach the skin, and you constantly get infections through it. You can close this up, and this is a transponder that sends power and signal across into the other side of the skull. So it doesn't need an internalized battery or anything of that nature. Let's talk of the bionic eye. Now, it's easy to get annoyed about the journalists for putting bionic there, but they did lift it from the press release. My notion of a bionic eye, it seems to say bionic is bionic man, can see better, do better. Yeah, this has got 64 points of light detection at the moment. My eye is not wonderful. It's got better than 64 points of light detection. Okay, it's a prototype and it's got distance to go. I don't have a photograph though of someone to show you, because there's very few of them who got anything like this. I think there's 6 now. This was, well, that was in February. I'm not aware of any more being put on. And then we get into deep brain stimulation. I spent yesterday trying to grab a bit of movie footage from the Dana Centre where they had a talk with someone who had Parkinson's disease, who'd got one of these spikes in. Halfway through the talk, he takes his little remote control, puts it against the pacemaker and turns the pacemaker off. And within seconds, he's completely out of control. To the point it requires someone else to turn it on to get him back under control again. And then he's pretty well as controlled as anyone here. And it's a remarkable sequence. The problem is it's buried in a 30-minute talk, and I couldn't splice the bit out if I wanted to. But I can give you the link if you want to see it. Now, I call that a therapy. It's a really useful therapy. But what else are these spikes used for? They're used for people with intractable pain, for people with severe depression, for people with obsessive compulsive disorder. Can all be addressed by these sorts of spikes. Now, I was talking to Professor Aziz, who's the guy putting these in Oxford. And so, okay, well, this is interesting. Once we get down to pain and some of these others, the classic way of, and the thing with pain is that when you use this, the person is aware of pain. They're aware that near them is some really, really nasty pain. They're just really glad it's not them that's got it. It is them that's got it. That's a kind of opiate response. You take an opiate, you know the pain's there, you're just glad you're not affected by it. So I said, well, there's other times when people use opiates, and that's a recreational model of the drug use. How about putting one of these spikes in as a happy spike? And he said, well, the only reason for not doing that is that most people don't want spikes in their head because of the risk involved. But I've seen base jumpers, and I've seen bungee jumpers, and there's some people who are quite happy to take quite considerable risks to get a buzz. And there's another way of getting a buzz, and that's to put a spike in and take the buzz directly. You can imagine a rave situation where you've actually got your little pacemaker, you've got the spike in, you give the radio frequency to the person in charge of the rave, and they could send a wave of euphoria around the room. It would probably be safer than taking ecstasy. So I think there's all sorts of ways of watching this one develop. Now, and we bumped into some questions of quite what's that doing to you, and who is the you in the middle of it, and started chasing that around this morning, and we might well want to pick that up again. But it opens up, I think, some distinct possibilities. The intriguing thing, when we start to go down to a sort of science level, is that what we don't know about these spikes is whether they're stimulating the area or turning it off. Aziz is just starting to do some work. It's quite difficult to put these people in classic scanners because they've got metal in their head. And the MRI scanners would suck it straight out again and make a bit of a nasty hole as it went. Aziz has just got a new scanning form which doesn't involve a large magnet. And so we'll have to see what happens out of that, and they can get a better idea of whether this is stimulatory or inhibitory. But at the moment, the field's open as to which way that's going. So to drugs. Well, we're quite used to altering the way our brain works with drugs. It's a well-established principle with alcohol. It amuses me. Well, it doesn't amuse me. We just had a sort of a European getting rid of nicotine, but alcohol does much more damage to us as a society than any other drug that's around there. But in small quantities, it can be a real boost to the way our brains can operate. Caffeine, likewise. We bumped into it again this morning. One of the problems with caffeine is the first time you use it, it will make you go quicker, faster, think. Second time you use it, you need that a little bit more to achieve the same effect. After you've been using it for months, you actually need to have quite a lot of caffeine just to have your normal level of activity. And the reason why you need that shot in the morning is not to get you up above the level, but just so you can retain normality. You could call that addiction, but it's uncomfortable calling it addiction for something that's on our kitchen work surface. I kind of know. I went through a phase during my PhD where I was having to get up in the night to have a cup of coffee so I could get back to sleep again, because I'd slightly overdone it. So I threw the coffee out one night at 2 in the morning and spent the next 4 days in bed with sweats and shivers until I could actually start moving on again. So I'm cautious about, I'm careful about caffeine, but you know, used in its right place and its right time, it's something that we're quite used to, and it's a common drug that does change the way that our brains work. So they're out there. And I bumped into nicotine. A highly stimulatory drug. It's a very potent compound that comes in and that we're very used to. Joshua Foe, oh actually, you should have an R on the end of the name. Foe is an interesting character. He's a young journalist in America, and he decided just to have a go at one point with Aldewell. It's the equivalent of Ritalin, just to see what it was like as a journalistic exercise to spend a day on it. Now, what he reported was that the first hour was an euphoric experience, and he could buzz along. He tried on his Game Boy and he got scores he'd never achieved before. He had a go at playing table tennis with his brother, who not beat him, and he was untouchable against his brother. He sort of sat at his keyboard hammering out work and had a great time. As he progressed through it, he developed a sort of a calm focus, and he just felt that he was on. There's an element of one of those roles you get on. Someone mentioned about novel writing and book writing. There's occasions you sort of get in and you sort of lock in and go. The intriguing thing that Joshua reported was that he felt he was on a roll, but he couldn't look sideways. The thing that enabled him to get a lot done was that he wasn't getting distracted at all, but equally, he wasn't being imaginative at all. Now, it'd be really useful to an employer who just wanted all the people to knuckle down and get on, and not think sideways. I'm not sure it's a huge enhancement to humanity to have a bunch of people who are so focused they don't look sideways. He then took a different tack, and he was sent at one point to cover the memory World Championships. And then he thought, hold on, maybe I could have a go at this one. And so he trained himself to remember things, and there's various tricks you can do. The classic is to pick something you enjoy doing. Many people use golf if you're golf players, and if you've got to remember a sequence of things, I'm an oarsman, I can remember most of my races. I can remember the people at the starts, I can remember the people who overtook me, I can remember the time I fell from my seat, I can, the whole lot. And what you do is you push one place in your mind the item that you need to remember next to the event that happened. So for the golfer, you put the tee in the ground mentally and you put an item next to it. And then you look to your bag of clubs, you take a club out and you see in the bag there the next item you need to remember. And then you take a swing and you see where it lands and you put the next item in your mind where the ball landed. And that way, a round of golf is plenty to remember a pack of cards. And if you play the game a few times, if you train to do that, most of us can remember the sequence of a pack of cards really quite quickly. He got himself to the point where he could remember a sequence of a pack of cards by just looking at the pack for 1 minute 40 seconds. And then 40 minutes later, he was absolutely fluent at retelling that sequence. The world champion actually stands at 30 seconds. You try getting through a pack of cards in 30 seconds, just turning the darn things over. And that's purely by using memory techniques of building a story in your head. put yourself on Ritalin, you're not going to come close to this. Actually, people who try don't even manage to perform these sorts of tasks. And then one of the things about the drugs like Ritalin is that the people that they work best on are the people whose mental facilities aren't working particularly well. And the people where there's negligible response to the drug are the people who are already going quite well. What appears to be happening is they're pulling us up towards the level of the best. But there's absolutely no evidence that they're pushing us beyond the level of the best. I was sort of intrigued with Simon Conway Morris's comments yesterday that we're about as good as it's going to get. And certainly the sort of take home from this area is heading in that direction at the moment. Okay? You never know, there might be a compound around the corner, but it hasn't shown up yet. And down the enhanced concentration route, some of these have side effects that are not always welcome. The classic Canadian Light Infantry Battle Group in Kandahar on 17th of April 2002, merrily going about a training event, and unfortunately in the area was an F-15 who decided to bomb them. The pilots were all taking a drug to keep them awake. The politics behind that are interesting. It was banned after the first Gulf War, but it's been reintroduced in the second Gulf plus Afghanistan items because we're out of pilots. So the overstretch is such that we've just got to keep these folks going. So for 3 or 4 days in a row, they take the one that keeps them awake, and then they take the one that makes them go to sleep for a day and go to sleep, and then they get up again and do another set of sorties. Well, it keeps you awake, but it makes you very paranoid. So they developed distinct paranoia. And the cockpit voice recordings which were played in court were exactly the sorts of response that you'd expect to get from a deeply paranoid person. Not listening to commands, not following rules, taking massively aggressive action against a minimal risk. And the small arms fire that he was reporting was at no risk, so he had no reason to take aggressive action until he'd had confirmation that this wasn't a friendly people on the ground, as if the other people were unfriendly. And I'm unaware of any wonder drug that isn't doing that. And my take is that the American Army is also unaware of it, because if they're aware of it, they'd be using it, and they're not. Memory is another interesting area. Enhanced memory. Well, what would enhanced memory be like? What would you like your memory to be able to do? The instant answer would be, well, I want to remember more. And so you get the push for the spikes, so you can plug yourself in and have a backpack that's got some form of additional memory requirement or whatever. Actually, there's a number of psychological clinical conditions that are associated around having too good a memory. One of the blessed things that our brain does is forgets, is actually screens out the information that's coming in through my ears at the moment. If I stop and really listen to it, there's a hum there, a blow there, and there's all sorts of noises that if they were constantly affecting my thinking, it would be a disaster to my ability to concentrate. Thank goodness I screened them out. All the visual stuff that's going in at the moment, the majority of it I instantly screen out. And tomorrow I wouldn't be able to tell you the detail, and I'm really pleased. Well, maybe your faces would be good to remember. I don't know. But remembering more, I'm not convinced that's going to be so wonderful. and filing more efficiently. That would be quite fun, if you could do it. But there's some quite good brain training ways of doing that and making that a more efficient process. And one of the problems, if we go back to these sorts of implants, the body is a really violent place. Once you put something into the body, quite a lot of processes start trying to get it back out again. They will encapsulate it at best, and they'll try to destroy it. There are not many implants that survive 10, 15, 20 years. If you want to go longer than that, you have to take it out and pop another one in. I'm not sure that's a great idea. And actually, if you've got a pacemaker, that needs replacing frequently, because the little flexi cable that goes down into the heart just gets fatigued from overflexing, snaps, and then in the end pokes out. And that's how the first people with pacemakers died. So we don't want to overinflate what we're capable of technically doing. Actually, intriguingly, the other option for enhancing your memory is to be able to remember less. And I don't know if you've seen the film Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a sort of cute little curious film, which plays on the notion of being able to selectively remove specific memories. And it's worth a view. And it's worth a view particularly because you can actually do it using propanolol. And there's a number of papers where there have been mass incidents and a large number of people have arrived in an emergency room at the same time. Randomly, they're given red or blue cards. Red cards get propanolol, blue cards get placebo. 2 weeks later, propanolol people, predominantly, they walked away from the incident quite calmly. Blue cards, placebo, that's where you expect to get the post-traumatic stress syndrome, because they're still reliving the memory. The other people have filed it away in a much calmer, much more efficient manner. It's no longer a problem to them. Hasn't, as far as I'm aware, moved into clinical trials, but in animal models, you can teach mice to be scared of doing various things, going into particular rooms in their maze or whatever. You can then give them propanolol, force them to repeat the experience. They draw it out from stored memory, bring it into current memory. With propanolol present, it doesn't get put back into stored memory again. Gone. Next time around, they're quite happy to do it. So you can actually selectively remove specific experiences from your memory. How you'd fine-tune that to take out particular things, okay, there's a bit of distance to go there. But as a general notion, it's an interesting thought, and it's an interesting possibility that is currently present. Uploading. Anders Sandberg, who works in Oxford, spent a good time with me and talking about the possibility of moving us into a computer. Fortunately for me, he just also sat down with 20 other enthusiasts of the concept and come up with what they call the whole brain emulation roadmap, what we need to do in order to be able to get there. So, which turns into a sort of 200-page document, so I can send you the PDF if anyone's interested in it. The notion of uploading, some people call it downloading, which is tricky, but it's the same thing, is that you take your brain and scan it, and then put that information into a machine. Now, the first problem with scanning, and one of their conclusions was that there is no conceivable technology for scanning it without first destroying it. So that's worth bearing in mind before you get too enthusiastic to be the first volunteer. And the level of scanning, we need to slice it into 1 or 2 micron slices. starting at one end of the brain and working to the other. Now that's quite a lot of slices at the end that you then need to scan to that sort of level of resolution. Once you've got that, you could build up a three-dimensional image of the network of neurons and their connections. And we know a lot about the fact that the physical architecture of the neurons and their connections has an importance in memory, in learning, in skills, in what's going on. You'd need to then take it down to a level of looking at what's going on at the end of each of these dendrons at the end. A few thousand of them per neuron. So we need to have a look at the vesicles, what's going across, and the nature of the neurotransmitters, whether they're upregulated or downregulated. And well, I'm not quite sure how you do the dynamic bit, and they're not either. Because what you'd have is a snapshot shot of the moment when you decided to start slicing, or possibly just a little bit beforehand. To reconstruct this into a massive database and a program. And the intriguing thing I had was talking to these people. You know, they're talking with language which sounds like next year, if not 10 years' time. It's a really imminent level of language that's being used. And one of the things that annoys me is that's been picked up within some of the Christian debate about it as a great fear that this is imminently about to happen. All that to be shaken around the place. I think it's an interesting intellectual game to play. But, so once you've got yourself into your big database, you can turn it on and start to emulate the brain. Now, Anders actually, I mean, he's a clever chap. And one of the things he's quite quick to say is that he is very skeptical that we will get to the point of you being in the machine. But that you might have an emulated human existence in a machine, but someone that never was anybody beforehand, if you recognise the difference. And I think there's a bit more chance of getting there than the replicated individual. But you've got to go on from replicating just the brain to actually the behaviour that the brain engenders. And if you're going to get to an uploaded individual, that behaviour needs to be specific to the way that an individual responds. And to be honest, if it can't do that, then the excitement behind it is distinctly reduced. If all we've got is a whole bank of machines that are identical, with an identical pre-programmed response, then in some way, if you look at it without being too careful, or maybe even scrutinise this individual one, has a human response, but you stack them all together and they're all identical. I'm not excited by that. And that human needs to split out at the various levels. What I then did was, I was quite keen to try to push them on timescales. And he's put the timescales into the roadmap now, which is quite useful. So if all you've got to do is to build up a population network, that's quite a big if. But if you've got to do that, and you're only wanting to do it on one person, then he reckons you need something around 50 terabytes of memory, and the associated processing power that you would need, following a sort of Moore's law and a prayer, would probably deliver it somewhere around 2032. The if involved in that, and whenever you get involved in enhancement, you've got to learn about ifology and multiple ifology, because when you start stacking ifs. Anyway, this works on the basis that replication will work so long as you just have to get the network right. if you need to understand the electrophysiology going on in that network, then we need a little bit more memory. We're now up to 8,000 terabytes. And the processing power is probably out somewhere like 2078 is the number labeled on it. Add that again, if we need to know the metabolic activity that's going on in as well, then we've extended now to 2029 for memory and 2098 for the processing power. If we need to know what the proteins are doing, because proteins are quite clever little molecules, then, you know, for the power we're out now at 2112. I think it's quite good to get it down to the individual year. And if we need to know the reactions between the proteins and the various molecules that are in there, we're off at 2218. I think the thing to recognise by this is this has been put together by the enthusiasts. What it means for me is that I can still have the intellectual discussion and watch the sci-fi films as to what this sort of community might be like, and it gives you a tool for asking some of the questions we did this morning around what it is to be a person and the rest of it. But I'm not deeply threatened by the existence of one occurring and demoting me or kicking me out. If Roger Penrose is right, then all bets are off. If we've got to understand the quantum behaviour within the system. Now, intriguingly, within the roadmap, their statement around that area, or certainly talking to Anders, his belief is that quantum behaviour isn't going to be important in the brain, because if it is, we won't be able to emulate it. Oh. So there's some interesting issues, I think, that come out that you would pursue down. I mean, it gives you the opportunity work to occur as some form of digital immortality lodged away on your memory stick. As it were, I wouldn't want to put it near a big magnet, though. And how about the possibility of backing yourself up multiply as you go through life? And you could say, 18 was good. Let's redo that one again. Brings a whole new definition to AVG. And being a bit aware of biases coming in. One of the themes that came at many levels, and it was less obvious in the brain, but many other areas of enhancement that I looked at, was that the drive to want it is one that comes from autonomy. It's my life, I want to be able to do what I like with it. If I want to enhance myself, you can't stop me doing it. When you actually push it through each time, the world where that can be delivered is one where you need enhanced legislation. And the autonomy quickly goes. And when you talk about that, and they talk around the legislative framework that you would need to build up to stop one person hacking the other person, it is a pretty harsh legislative framework. There would certainly be no notion of autonomy or personal decision making. It would be massively reduced. And I think with enhancement, that was probably the thing that I picked out most as something to be aware of as an ethicist. You've got various Groundhog Day possibilities. You could take your backup and put it in again, except Groundhog Day works because the world moves on but you don't. So you can go into it a few times and try to get it better next time, and no one knows it's happening. So I'm not entirely sure how that one would work in this digitalized existence. But I think the ultimate issue around uploading is this nothing butteriness that we bumped into this morning. It all rests on the premises that we're nothing but our brain, because the rest of it wouldn't be there. And I'm not convinced that would be the most exciting of lives. And I'm not prepared to give that the grounding and enhancement. At any rate. So, just to start where I got with, and I think when you're into this, we have to be very careful what sort of definition of enhancement we're chasing down, if you want to chase enhancements. And when we get into the brain bit, it becomes very focused, because I think we can sloppily get into the view that we are just our brain. And if you push that, you don't have to push it very hard before it starts to fall down. But some of the discussions move quite rapidly in that direction. In terms of implants, I pursue those at hope or hype. Well, yeah, I think there's distinct therapeutic implants that are going to give us personal things we can do that we couldn't do before. But a species, I didn't see a species thing happening. Drugs, again, down at the therapeutic and personal level, I'm not convinced that any talk of a species transformation is anything other than moving into the realm of hype. And there's certainly people who chase it around. The pattern gets a bit repetitive until we move to uploading. Well, I've got no idea what it would look like, and it's certainly in the realm of hype if you're saying we're going to have a whole species of them. So I'd like to leave you there. And it's, I hope that what that's done is just give you a flavour of the things which are talked about around the brain enhancement, and a glimpse of what may or may not be achievable. Thank you.
Oh, that's given us some food for thought, I'm sure, yes.
Thanks very much for that. I was just wondering if you want to talk a bit more about Ritalin, and say, do you think then that it's not good to give it to children who have attention deficit disorder?
I think all drugs, most drugs, they have a distinct therapeutic use. Like many drugs, they can also be extended to an abuse territory. So within a clinical environment, with someone who has a distinct inability to be able to control their attention at a condition or disease type level, I've got no problem of using a pharmaceutical aid. I think anyone who's going down that route needs to look at it carefully, because I don't believe in side effects, I believe in unwanted effects. And anything that you put in will also have unwanted effects, and you need to consider it carefully. The fear of it is that it's out there as a smartie that you take before doing your exams. And at that level, I have a caution about it. But I think it's I'm not a clinician, but I think it's got a high probability of a good use as a therapeutic compound.
How much do you think this is being pushed by the fact that humans are being asked to do tasks that they could not do without enhancement?
Well, I think that goes back to the Ritalin issue. I mean, half the reason our kids need Ritalin is we put them in inhuman things called schools. And 8 or 9 tell them to sit still. I got 3 boys, it's not a good thing to do to them. And so, yeah, I mean, we're trying to shape ourselves to some form of idealised society, or some, I don't even know, I'm not sure I'm prepared to call it idealised, notionalised, as opposed to building a society that fits the people that we've got. So, yeah, no, I go down that route.
Thank you. Yes?
When one trains to be a fast bowler, shall we say, you're enhancing your ability to shoot balls down fast. There comes a point where you keep on doing that, you end up with a mashed up foot. It can't take the strain of the constant stamp when you come to bowl. And that's in a lot of things. Ballet dancers at the end of they're actually physically damaged. It seems to me that all of these enhancement options, including the one that you're doing, to some extent they're okay to begin with, but if you push it to excess, you end up with problems.
Well, if you ask the East German rowing squad from the 70s and 80s about that, they're taking the government to court about the steroids that they were given, and they're having to show up in court in wheelchairs because of the consequence of doing that. And I guess the enhancement enthusiasts are saying, well, that's because we've got horrible, nasty, fleshy, squodgy bodies, and let's actually get over that. These biological things that we've been lumbered with do tend to wear out. So why don't we get rid of our legs and go for a sort of Oscar Pistorius type one? When his run out, he throws them away and gets another one off the shelf. There are some quite clever prosthetics now that have power in them as well. That so long as you can charge up your batteries frequently, you can run and walk and do all sorts of strange things, spin around on the spot just by standing still and pressing the button, and the rest of us can't. So their argument would be, if we can build some of these units, then we can get away from the limitations that this fleshy mess gets us into.
Universal soldier kind of.
Well, yes, and there's a guy out in Afghanistan whose legs were blown off, and he's back out there again now on prosthetics in the Marines, and it's an interesting game for him because he's got a wardrobe of them depending on what he needs to do that day, and he can put on the one that's most appropriate for the task that's coming up. So it's kind of a universal soldier so long as he's got his vehicle behind him carrying all the spares for the other tasks. Now at that point they say, well, that's an engineering problem that needs resolving. And it is. I mean, the wonderful thing about biological systems is they're remarkably engineered. I can do lots of things with this fleshy thing that they're quite quick to demean, that take an awful lot of replacing with servos and cables and switches.
I was just wondering about the ethics of it, whether a guiding ethic might be that there needs to be some sense of limiting how far you push it.
Well, and then your issue then is trying to work out what a normal human is. And John Wyatt's spoken here before, and he's developed a model which is along the lines of an art restorer. And I think there's probably matters of life and death on the bookshelf over there. And his notion there is that art historians and art restorers have an ethical code, which means when they pick up a piece of work, they try to take it back to the artist's original intentions. So his line of argument from that is that medical therapy should take the human being back towards the artist's original intentions, and you shouldn't try to improve a Van Gogh. If you're trying to restore a Van Gogh, you should take it back to what it was in the original day. Thus far, I find that okay. The problem is I don't know what the artist's original intentions were. And so as a tool to actually use it as an individual decision-making tool, I think it falls down when you pop it into practice. Up until then, as a theory, it's kind of okay. So notionally, I like the idea. Actually applying it, I think, is curious. And then you would land up with a situation of saying, well, the person we ought to be is someone who could run 100 meters in 10 seconds. He could intellectually create the next drug compound. Who could, and we'd cherry pick off the maximum achievement at each point. And so that's what a human being ought to be, and it's our right to demand therapy to get there. I have the sort of gut feeling that that doesn't work either. So again, notionally I like the concept, but actually how you'd write those rules down or delineate any of them, I think really quite can't work.
Yeah.
It's a trivial question actually.
They're the worst.
Supposing a brain emulator becomes possible in the future,
Okay.
will humanity comes to grip with the notion of spiritual robots? what do you make of the movie Minority Report?
Which one?
Minority Report.
Minority Report.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I haven't been to see that one, so I can't comment on Minority Report. Well, and this is where I think it actually becomes slightly more of a fun question to chase around. Having dismissed the chance of it happening, I think you can still get something out of asking what if it did. And it comes down again to what Peter was saying this morning. To what extent the individual atoms that I started off with a long time ago are gone, and another set of atoms are the person I am now. But I like to think I'm still sort of the same person that started off 40 odd years ago. So that then is suggesting that we can separate the being that's me from the physicalness that's me in some way. Pursuing down that route, I spent, not alone, a number of time trying to chase around what it is that makes a human, what it makes different from another animal. And from a Christian viewpoint as well. And we encountered some of that yesterday. And certainly I don't think the genetics does it. The classic is I'm 50% banana, and most of you agree with me. And we had to be quite cautious as we use that term, but when they say, what happens if you put a human gene into something? Well, I'm not entirely sure I can spot a human gene in that slice it out, split it in way. And when you break it down to try to find what actually defines or differentiates us from anything else, you end up with this wonderful concept of Imago Dei is the only thing that I've got going for that. And then we go into another bookshelf with plenty of people trying to unpack what that one actually is and means when it's running. But it suggests to me that one of the things out of that is that what it is to be human, what it is, the important bit of us, is something that is given us, or given onto us, put onto us in some covenant relationship by God. And at that point, you then extend it through to say, well, if you were producing this sort of machine, that's going to come down to God to decide what relationship God decides to have with it. And I don't know him that well to be able to answer that one. But I think you'd have to be heading down that route before you'd move it.
Heading down to the road of golems, golems.
Golems. And sorry, I
mean, the relation between the created and the creator.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've taken myself to the end of my intellectual piece of elastic. On that particular one.
Perhaps a question, well, Katie at the back.
I just had a question about the pain aspect of this and kind of getting rid of suffering and pain. It's quite an interesting concept, especially as that seems to be a part of the human condition. Obviously from a Christian perspective as well. I'd be really interested to hear what you think about that, especially as I've recently come across a group called the Abolitionist Society. Have you heard of them?
In terms of what? There's various abolitionists depending on what they're trying to abolish.
They believe that you should abolish pain.
They think you should abolish pain.
They should have the right to have access to all kinds of pain relief, and eventually that we should be evolving towards a society where there is no pain and there is a utopia on Earth where you shouldn't have to suffer it. And this is being led by someone in Sussex, I can't remember his name.
Right.
Unfortunately.
And is that being driven from a theological viewpoint as well, or?
Not from a theological point of
Okay.
view, no, not at all.
Okay.
Anyway, just like to hear
Yeah,
that.
okay. On pain, I always start with, what's the disease?
Leprosy?
That's the one. Try and ask someone with leprosy how good it is not to have pain. Leprosy in itself doesn't do you all that much damage, other than that it takes out your ability to feel pain. And once you've lost that, you do lots and lots of damage to yourself. So at a purely practical physical level, pain is a really useful tool. At a theological point of view, from a Christian point of view, we can then land up in a, well, wouldn't that be a desire to get us into a sort of Edenic sort of environment where pain's presumably really, really nasty and it can't have been there before the fall. And I didn't see anything of that. Actually, he was told that her pain will increase in childhood, not start in childbirth, giving a distinct impression that it was there beforehand. So part of the ordered and given system. And actually, if you push the pain thing further, I'm not sure how exciting a world would be without the potential for it. And at that point, you'd start abolishing anything like work or anything else nasty, and you'd end up sort of sat next to the swimming pool with your pina colada in eternal sunshine without getting cancer, with nothing to do and every day off, and no worries and no drives, and death at the end of it. And it's great for a week. And I'm looking forward to it in a week's time, but I don't think it's going a long way. I'm also not sure, if you go down the Adam didn't have pain route, then you've got a very funny sort of rock for him to kick in Eden. Or was he incapable of bashing himself in Eden or tripping over? You're in a really strange world. So I think from a number of directions. At the other end of there, it's been, a lot of these things are driven out of a therapeutic environment in which pain delivery, particularly in this country, is very pain relief delivery, is poor. And the hospice movement would be one of the first people to jump up and down on that. So, providing an environment to deliver people from disease-driven pain, I'm all in favour of pursuing that one. So I wouldn't knock them entirely, but some of their aims and goals are questioned.
Okay. Cormac and Paul.
Could you clarify? I've never understood the whole brain upload thing.
Okay.
This, you can upload texts and images, for example. Even this video here, as it is now, we could either wait till the end and then upload it, which is the way we're going to do it, or you could upload it, as you know, onto the web in real time. But the thing of looking at me when I was 18, whenever that is, presumably that means that the whole thing has been stored and then you rerun it. First, in other words, is it in real time or not? That's the first question. And then the second was, even if it is, and you manage that somehow, all you're doing is you're looking at this incredibly complex electrical circuit in real time on a computer. Is the idea that somehow you might be able to program that then in the future? What's the purpose?
Well, the purpose is that what was your first question again? Because that was,
is it in real time first?
So you do a fixed moment stop and slice, and then you'd have this huge factories of slicers and scanners. And within his roadmap, they actually map out the scale of the factory that would be needed in order to slice and scan. It's an intriguing investment, per brain.
What's that give you then?
What that would give you is a one-time snapshot of what at that instant, if you could instantaneously flash freeze everything, and that would be an interesting task in itself. And then, as if you were going to reanimate it from then on. So when you pop it in it, the idea is it would then live again. So you and your experience and your mental processes and your memories and your passions and desires would now live out that existence in a digital sense.
So it's a rerun.
Well, continuing on and interacting with the other people who are in machines next to you that are equally performing this task. Their claim is that the accelerating miniaturization of computer technology is such that it will be more environmentally friendly to lock everyone in one of these machines and have us wandering around eating baked beans. It takes quite a few mountains to get all the silicon. But,
I think.
sorry.
Somebody else before me.
I was just going to really quickly and then, yes.
Request an observation. First of all,
In polite company, would you not refer to leprosy? Leprosy makes people run for the hills. Traditionally, it's Hansen's disease, is the accepted euphemism. Secondly, pain is part of your sensory endowment. It's a gift. I do not understand wanting to have your eye taken out or an ear taken off, which is what is equivalent of having your ability to feel pain.
It's an intriguing one, that though, because there are a group of people who I suppose they think about them, they don't have one of the senses,
i.e. people who are part of the deaf community, who are campaigning for their ability to deliberately select embryos that will be deaf, will be genetically deaf, because they don't want to have children who are part of another community as they see it, who were very upset with the current framing of the HFEA legislation, which as it stands would make that difficult for them. But I'm not a supporter of their cause, and I'd be happy with...
I would have thought that what was underlying that was a fundamental fault which is common in society, which is to see the fetus or the baby as their possession. It's the other way around, actually. I've often said in teaching that parents don't have children, children have parents, and the prime person is the baby.
I think that's one of the faults that's part of the thinking. I think we could find a couple of others.
okay, Ray.
Yes. In relation to the last discussion, what's your take on John Searle's remark in relation to machine intelligence? He said you can simulate a hurricane on a computer at whatever level of detail you want, in principle, but that's not quite the same thing as a hurricane.
Well, that's simulation, aren't you?
yeah, and the emulators would be quite happy with that, and just say, but won't it be better? Because your hurricane's restricted to one place, and it will go out. Once you've got this thing emulated in a machine, if your machine gets dodgy, we just move it to the next generation. We could upgrade you every 10 years. We could pop you in a spaceship and send you on a journey that's going to take 10,000 years to get there, and just put you in hibernate, and then open the laptop lid when you get there, and you'll say, oh gosh, that was quick, wasn't it? So they would argue that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And anyone who can't see the excitement of it has got a small mind and really can't see the wonder of the opportunities that would come out of this entirely new existence of being. So yeah, that one where your legs do fall to pieces if you run too hard, that old existence that you've left behind, they can only see the problems in that, and that this would liberate you into a new environment where the physical nastiness of a hurricane, you could play hurricane games for yourself and actually decide to sit in the hurricane one day and let your digital self experience that.
Yeah. What they're presupposing then is that the subjective content of this information which specifies me is independent of whatever system it's instantiated in.
Well, and at that point, we bumped into dualism this morning.
Yeah.
Now, these people, if you suggested they're dualists, are not very happy. But actually, they're pushing dualism in a new direction, but I think in a very, very hard direction. They're distinctly separating yourself from your physical existence and actually saying that the substance that you are, that creates you, is immaterial. That you have an existence that is separate from your substance, and it's the existence that's important. And you could bury that if you can find another substance to bury it in, that would be great, wouldn't it? So, as far as I can see, and there's others better set to do it, but that moves quite much into a dualistic framework, which is one that they would start off by saying is complete anathema.
well now. We've got a host of hands. Yeah, Karen.
Doesn't all this suggest that it's a good thing that God and not humans that's designing? Because we believe we're going to have an eternal life outside of a computer anyway, so why would you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the simple answer is yes, I suppose. But just see if I can play any.
Well, couldn't our new bodies be cybernetic?
I don't want to.
I mean, I think it comes back to, I mean, we are good, we are clever, we are capable of doing lots of things. But actually the system that we're set up in is just utterly remarkable. And the hubris that suggests that we're capable of creating one that would be even better, it is extraordinary actually. I think and at times I've had great fun meeting the people. I mean, I'm aware that there's an element of sort of belittling some of these characters and the way the conversation is going at the moment. They're great people. I have super time talking with them and chasing some of these ideas around. But there's times when I just think I've enjoyed my life so far, and I don't think that would work inside a machine. And I just feel that they might have not had quite such a good time at times.
Yeah.
In the road mapping, how socially responsible have they been? Have they looked at who's going to be the custodians of these machines? Who's going to be the custodians of the custodians? What's the environmental impact of all this technology? Are we assuming that microchips will use less and less energy every 10 years?
And they are, yes. And they're down the environmental route. I mean, there is a chapter on the environmental benefits of being uploaded. And in all seriousness,
was that written before the oil crisis?
Yeah. They develop quite sophisticated arguments. I mean, it's, you know, they're not silly people, but like a lot of clever arguments, they've got a couple of ifs in. And you need to play ifology when you read them. I go through with, in the book I called it Ifology in a Hyperscope. And I don't know if you've read Potter, he's got the sneakerscope which goes off and if there's anyone dangerous sneaking around. Well, I went into my interviews with these people with a hyperscope, and as soon as we moved into hype, it buzzes. And just to give me a sense of warning. And the thing that triggers a hype is an if. And it's a bit like a sneeze, you just hear it there, it's almost gone, and you think, oh, I think there's an if there. And then you get a second one, they normally come in quick succession. And the environmental impacts assessment's got a few ifs built in. And it's a little, but they're big leaps. And intriguingly, you'll see that in Dawkins, The Selfish Gene, there's 2 or 3 paragraphs which are utterly critical to the book. And they've got ifs in. Take the ifs out, it doesn't work anymore. If you play ifology on some of these texts and just cut the ifs out and see what happens, you can end up in a slightly different world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder, is anyone approaching this from the angle of that we have a certain natural capacity that we're underutilizing, so that with things like the memory training, there's a long way we could, you know, in various areas, advance ourselves like that.
I mean, arguably, you'd hope that the Institute of Education had that as its prime goal and responsibility, as does every school. The extent to which we manage to deliver that, though, can be seen by looking at the society we live in. And that's, you know, I guess a lot of what lots of us trying to do is to engage people to make themselves use themselves better. And the gulf between what we're personally capable of, and what a really trained human being is capable of is so extraordinarily large. I mean, the world champion memory guy, and I've forgotten the number, I'll have to look it up. I think it's something like 200 packs of cards that he memorizes in a couple of hours and then has to retell in the afternoon. And I can't remember what the number is, but it's bizarre numbers.
And that's just with the normal brain.
Presumably he's done extremely well in every exam he's ever taken.
He lives just around the corner, so you can get him in one day and ask him. He lives in Bedford, so...
Why would anyone ever want to memorize 2
Well, why does anyone want to run 100 meters in 10 seconds?
I can remember very well when I was in high school where there was a local farm laborer who could memorize just about anything. He could tell what movie had been shown in the local theatre for more than 25 years, and he could do the usual trick of saying what day of the week it fell, Julius Caesar, and so on. And he was mentally defective. So there is a kind of curious thing there that enhancing memory in that case actually was at the expense of other things.
Well, and I think, you know, my sort of second year at university, I'd spent far too much time on the river, sort of 6-7 hours a day training, and I went through one of those sort of early 20s phases of writing poetry, and I got one called Fit for Nothing, because I was extraordinarily fit. You know, I could run 5 miles stop without being out of breath. A resting heart rate of about 45, could take it up to 180, would be down to 45 within sort of 30-40 seconds of finishing a race. But actually, socially I wasn't actually going very well. And so, you know, I think we've become incredibly lopsided. And at that point, is it fit or is it pathology? I think we're about to celebrate the world's biggest collection of pathological people, called the Olympics. And it's an intriguing event.
There are probably a few of the intellectual kind in Cambridge, I think. I've come across them, certainly. Yes.
I'm a complete layperson, but isn't a lot of what's happening in the brain a result of what's going on elsewhere in the body anyway?
Well, it's really important not to chop it off, as it were, and see it in isolation. I mean, even in terms of neural processing, a lot of it goes on elsewhere. If you lose the spine, you've lost an awful lot of really important neural processing. It's then the peripheral nerves that go right the way through. So just even on the neural level, absolutely. And if you throw in hormones as well. And that's where you've got to start working at that level. We're an integrated whole. And what this particular version of the uploading nothing butteriness is ignoring an awful lot of that.
There's a question.
Well, I had a question.
Go on.
It's almost gone now, but about the selection, I tried very hard to follow what you've been saying about inhabiting a computer. Now, I don't know in what form am I asked to inhabit, or will we be asked to inhabit computers? I mean, is this a new existence, or is it the present existence? Can you please simplify or enlighten me on this concept? I mean, if it's a pure matter of numbers, then I'm content to leave it with Alice in Wonderland. I mean, there must be a process of selectivity going on. What part of your identity are you selecting to inhabit these computers? And who's in charge of the selection? Is it oneself in some form? It's very, very nebulous, in my view, as I've heard it at the moment. Can you simplify?
No. I think you've summed it up perfectly in the question. I mean, I think they're all the valid questions. And I don't think they're adequately answered. I mean, what you've got 2 routes to go down. One is to say, actually, you've completely missed the point. What you'd have is something that's so radically different, so utterly enhanced, that it's a completely new form of existence we can't get our head around. Well, then that's not enhanced human, that's utterly different and completely different. Or you go down the other route, in which case it's so subhuman it's not worth thinking about. And either of those I don't think fit the title of the bill. And for them then to be self-building, self-maintaining, self-powering, self-updating, stretches my imagination again beyond its elastic limit.
Well, I think it's 3:30. I think we'd better stop and give Pete a very big round of applause.